David Lynch has come to be regarded as such an icon. It's hard to grasp just how anomalous, how innately agitating his work was when it first appeared. Many of the earliest reactions to Eraserhead, many of the earliest reactions to the majority of Lynch's films, period, were ones of disgust, indignation, puzzlement. He doesn't fit into any category. His films are as masterful in their craft as they are shocking in their intensity, bewildering in their originality. Lynch manages to come off simultaneously as funny and horrifying, sincere and ironic, delicate and brutal. He is one of the few with a vision that feels totally unimitative. I don't think he ever quite expected to reach the level of success and exposure he did, and in some ways his career has played out like a tug of war between his core artistic instincts and the pressures of commercial acceptance. One of the things that makes his work so interesting is that it's born out of that conflict. Mainstream success can be funny that way. It opens up opportunities even as it creates new boundaries. Lynch has almost always been just popular enough to keep the larger industry intrigued, but so unconventional, there's always a desire to stay distant. That's made it really tricky for him to get his films made. If Lynch could have done it his way, I imagine he'd be making his films like his paintings, getting ideas out with as little filter as possible. One of the sad facts of the industry is that it's not unlike an enormous filtration system designed to make all movies more like other movies. When your movies aren't like any others, that leaves you without a paddle, most of the time. But one thing I've discovered over the course of doing these videos is that even the films artists don't make can massively influence the ones they do make. Art, for those actively doing it, is really more about the process than the result. Here are a few unmade Lynch films that I think give an interesting glimpse into his process and reveal some of the things going on in his head at different times. Following Eraserhead's ascension in the midnight movie pantheon, and a brief affair with interesting studio projects, Lynch really started striking out on his own with Blue Velvet, a sleeper hit in 1986, and the most fiercely controversial film of that year. Though Lynch was pretty much finished with studio offers by then, there was one that came his way from Warner Brothers around that time that thoroughly piqued his interest. It was a film adaptation of a 1985 book by Anthony Summers called Goddess: The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe. Summers' book had boldly theorized that Monroe's death, often ruled a suicide, had actually been murder, motivated by potential scandal and shady political interests. There was already a screenwriter attached, TV veteran Mark Frost. Lynch and Frost delivered a script titled Venus Descending in 1987 that apparently caused the studio to lose its nerve. The project was a legal minefield, and even though Frost and Lynch changed all the names, dubbing their Monroe analog Rosalind Ramsey, it eventually proved too risky. The film died, but a creative partnership was born. Frost and Lynch discovered they worked rather well together, and decided to team up again for an original screenplay. One Saliva Bubble was the next major collaboration between Frost and Lynch, a script that, along with one I've already covered, Lynch's own Ronnie Rocket, has become one of the director's minor legends. It's a comedy set in a small town involving a government weapon that malfunctions after a saliva bubble causes a short circuit. When the weapon goes off, it causes all the residents of this small town to exchange personalities. Lynch has described the goings-on in the film as out-and-out, wacko, dumb comedy. The situations involve everything from assassins to Chinese acrobats, Heinz ketchup, and the Pentagon. The humor is often unabashedly infantile and pushed to a ridiculous extreme. The film nearly started production in the late 80s with stars Steve Martin and Martin Short, but was canceled when financier Dino De Laurentiis' company started to collapse after prolonged financial trouble. The two Frost Lynch projects, Venus Descending and One Saliva Bubble, about 1,000,000 miles apart from each other in tone and subject matter, were arguably synthesized in their very next collaboration, Twin Peaks. The tragic blonde leading a double life became Laura Palmer, and the eccentric small town plagued by strange events became the titular setting. It doesn't sound like Twin Peaks was consciously inspired by either of these scripts, but I imagine the ideas were lurking somewhere nearby, ready to resurface. One Saliva Bubble especially feels like one that continuously resurfaces in Lynch's work, as little moments of inexplicable absurdity intruding on his otherwise dark worlds. It'd be fun to examine this script more in its own video. One day. Dream of the Bovine sounds like another example of Lynch's peculiar taste for tasteless comedy. It came at a very different time in his career than One Saliva Bubble. Wild at Heart had won the 1990 Palme d'Or, but polarized critics. Twin Peaks' Fire Walk with Me had been outright despised. He'd reached a level of public recognition that was unbelievable for someone so avant-garde, and yet his work seemed to be getting steadily angrier, more aggressive, more severe. Audiences were finding his style harder to embrace. In a way, I think Lynch might have been rejecting his celebrity, looking for ways to push against it, break out of it, declare himself as something more. Not much is really solidly known about Dream of the Bovine. Lynch worked on it in the mid-90s, co-writing the script with Robert Engels, his co-writer on Fire Walk with Me, and about the only thing known of the story is that it followed 3 men who used to be cows, possibly living in the Van Nuys region of LA, or maybe somewhere in Paris circa 1911. Harry Dean Stanton was attached to play one of the leads, and Lynch actually had a few meetings with Marlon Brando, unsuccessfully trying to convince him to take another of the roles. Brando apparently played with the idea of doing the film in drag, which Lynch was all for, but Brando backed out. Lynch was unable to drum up much support for the project at all, and it seems to have simply fizzled out. There is definitely a side of Lynch eager to do something provocatively lowbrow. He's described Dream of the Bovine as being in the same realm as One Saliva Bubble, only even more stupid and repulsing. Something tells me it was informed by the anger of this period, and it may have found later expression in Lynch's web series Dumbland, easily the crudest thing he's ever done. As Lynch's anti-commercial attitude increased, so did the difficulty he had financing his films. There would be one last unexpected hurrah with the Disney-produced, G-rated, and very moving The Straight Story in 1999, before Lynch started quietly rejecting the film business altogether in the 21st century. Once more, this is a Lynch project we don't really know all that much about, aside from a synopsis that originates in Lynch's memoir, Room to Dream. Set mostly in Los Angeles, Antelope Don't Run No More braids threads from Mulholland Drive and Inland Empire into a narrative fantasia that incorporates space aliens, talking animals, and a beleaguered musician named Pinky. It's impressed everyone who's read it as one of the best scripts Lynch has ever written. Lynch had become mostly fed up with filmmaking in the early 2000s. He tried to get another television show going, but the pilot was thrown out by the network. Lynch retooled it into one of his most acclaimed films, Mulholland Drive, in 2001. Mulholland Drive could have worked as a comeback for him, but by then, he wasn't very interested in coming back. Instead, he would next work on a mostly self-financed film, Inland Empire, released in 2006. Inland Empire and Mulholland Drive both feel like a reflection of his time in Hollywood, a summation of frustration, regret, broken hopes, and dreams. By the time he'd finished them, he didn't seem to have much left to say. Lynch entered a state of not quite retirement, disillusioned with filmmaking, but still a very prolific artist. He took time to focus on painting, photography, music, writing, activist work with transcendental meditation, even a few experimental shorts released through his website. Features appeared to be in the past. In 2010, he did give it one more shot, writing the script for Antelope Don't Run No More and trying to find financing. It didn't materialize, and Lynch didn't lose much sleep over it. That could have been his last association with the industry, but something amazing happened. Around 2014-2015, Showtime started putting together a revival of Twin Peaks. Lynch decided it had possibilities, and came back to direct and co-write with his old buddy, Mark Frost. It nearly fell apart when the story expanded far beyond the original 9-episode plans. Lynch was ready to walk. Showtime gave him the budget for twice the number of episodes, and in 2017, Twin Peaks: The Return premiered to some of the most rabid enthusiasm ever to greet a Lynch piece. The Return felt like a culmination in lots of ways. There are things in it that harken back to Ronnie Rocket, One Saliva Bubble, possibly even other projects, we don't know for sure, but Lynch seems to have packed the show with an abundance of ideas that had been building up in him for a long time. It was like seeing the floodgates finally let loose. Despite the jagged, hard edge it had, there was something oddly joyous about it. There's a different Lynch on display here, someone less conflicted, more at peace. With a renewal of interest in Lynch's work, and many of his maligned achievements receiving overdue reevaluation, there's been much talk about Lynch's future projects, a possible 4th season of Twin Peaks, a resurrection of Antelope Don't Run No More, perhaps for Netflix. Despite releasing a demented short film through the streaming platform in 2020, Lynch doesn't appear to have anything currently on the table. He seems okay with that. The director is pretty content all around these days. He keeps busy with art projects, other pursuits, and despite rumors that he's now definitively retired, Lynch is emphatic that that's not the case. He's open to whatever possibilities might come his way in the future, but it doesn't look like film production is high on his list of priorities right now. I think it's entirely possible we've seen his last large-scale work with The Return, and honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. Lynch, however, is anything but predictable, so as long as he's around, I'm sure there will be no shortage of surprises.